Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you as I always do from my little nutshell of infinite space right here in the Wood of the Holly. And today I've got a really special guest. I'm really super stoked. I've been excited about this for a number of weeks. This gentleman just won the 2024 Pulitzer Prize for biography. He began his writing career at the age of 16. He was working for his hometown newspaper out in, I guess, Rockland County. He went to the Northwestern University, and he's been a reporter all across our country in New Orleans and Dallas, Chicago, and the Wall Street Journal. He just finished a terrific book, which I just read, which won this award. It's called Martin Luther King, A Life. Prior to that, he wrote Ali, A Life. He's been a tremendous chronicler of society and the sporting life, and sometimes in different orders. And beyond that, he wrote about Lou Gehrig, the birth of the pill, Al Capone, and the story of Jackie Robinson's first season. Super prolific, and my newest friend on earth. Welcome to A Rebel Without Applause, Jonathan Eig. How are you?
I'm great, Bill. Thanks so much. I've been looking forward to talking to you.
Oh, good. Well, I tell you, I just finished both books, and like I just said a moment ago, that being the Muhammad Ali book, and just prior to that, the Martin Luther King book. And they do seem, in a certain way, if you read them close together, like they live in the same moment. Their lives intersect at a few moments, and if not even intersecting, they're informing each other's lives tremendously across really the 1960s. So, as a word right off the bat, folks, read these books. They're kind of help us put a lens on really an important part of our history that is it's drifting into the past as we zip into the future. My first thought for you is, having done all this work on Martin Luther King, which way is this universe bending? Towards justice? Is it which way? I'm not sure right now.
I don't see a lot of bending toward justice right now. You got to look at the long arc. That's the key, the word long. When King said the long arc of history bends toward justice. Well, if you look at the small part right now, it ain't bending the right way. It's bending toward hatred and intolerance, prejudice. But King believed that the long arc bends toward justice. I'm not so sure. I wonder and I've talked to a lot of people about this, just sort of philosophically, which is stronger, the arc of justice or the arc of hatred and nationalism and the desire to feel like we're superior to someone. I don't know. I hope King's right. I hope the justice is and love is a stronger force.
Well, if we go back to 1885 or 1890, we're probably doing better now than we were then, in spite of the current uh, reversals. What can I say? That's why I actually take comfort in geological time and dinosaurs, because it's
Right.
a much longer arc of geological history as opposed to the moral arc of you know history. I want to ask you quickly, to write a book, and I've done some of my own work in this area as a screenwriter. It takes a ton of courage to tackle an icon. You're into icons, Ali, and of course Martin Luther King. And I'm just thinking, like, what a ballsy thing to do.
Yeah, I guess so. And I've had some friends say to me, like, "What are you thinking? Like, what gives you the right to tell that guy's story?" And the answer is nothing gives me the right. I've got to see if I can earn it. And that's why I always start by asking the people in these universes, like, "Will you help me? If I decide to write a book about Muhammad Ali or Martin Luther King, will you help me? You know, John Lewis, will you help? Jesse Jackson, will you help me? And Reverend Lawson, who we've talked about, if those folks hadn't thought it was a good idea and if they hadn't agreed to help me with the book, I'm not sure I would have had the courage to do it.
Well, how did you earn their trust? Like, for instance, Reverend Lawson is someone I was in his nonviolent workshops right down the road here in LA at the Holman Methodist Church, and he helped me tremendously, not in a deeply personal way, just going and hearing him talk, literally giving the same talks that he gave in the basement of the church in Nashville in 1960 to people like John Lewis and Diane Nash and Bernard Lafayette, people that helped clearly you write about. Martin Luther King. How did you earn their trust and go, okay, this guy's real? Because I had some of those issues myself.
Yeah, well, the first thing is just getting access, getting them to pick up the phone. But then, you know, it's about framing. Like the first conversation is just, hey, you knew Martin Luther King, and I don't think the rest of us do. Like, I think we've lost sight of his humanity. That's the first thing I said to these folks when I picked up the phone. Like, I think we as a country have forgotten that he was human, that he had, fears and failures, and that his achievements are even greater when you put them in the relief of the fact that he's human. But when you turn him into a statue and 1,000 streets and a national holiday, it's easy to lose touch. So I'd like to write a book that helps us know him again in the way you knew him. I'd like to help introduce readers to the man that you knew as Martin. And that was something that really went over well. I think they felt like almost everyone I talked to felt like that was a worthwhile cause and that they would help. And I think it was clear that I was reaching these people in the last stages of their lives, and that there wasn't going to be another opportunity to write a book like this with living witnesses. And I think that was a strong part of the appeal too. Like, let's do this while we can.
I don't think people get today the social moment that King emerged in and how courageous what he did was, because the sloughs and bayous were filled with unknown black faces and bodies that had been uh, killed and murdered. And to do what he did when he did was really you're an invitation to get killed. We don't think. I think some of the courage that it really took to do what he did, specifically nonviolently, is not well understood today. When we think of Emmett Till as the biggest example, but for every Emmett Till, there were many more.
Yeah, and King was killed too, obviously, at
Right.
only the age of 39. But that's something, Reverend Lawson and I talked about a lot. Where did that courage come from to overcome the fear? And not just for King to overcome the fear, but for him to send the message to millions of people around the country that they too could overcome their fear. Because it was not, hypothetical that they might be killed. When the Montgomery bus boycott began, almost overnight, Klan membership doubled and White Citizens Council membership tripled almost overnight. And King's home was bombed, almost immediately when the Montgomery bus boycott began. So they're sending a very clear message: if you keep this up, you're going to die. King not only carried on, but he inspired all of these humble people, these ordinary folks who did not seek positions of leadership, to take that same risk that he was taking. And once they overcame that fear, then the racists lost a lot of their power. They couldn't intimidate the same way. And the nonviolent piece, which you mentioned, is so important because it gave them the moral upper hand. When you say you can shoot at us, we are not going to shoot back. You can punch us and kick us. We're not going to punch and kick back. Suddenly, this oppressed group, this group that's been treated as second class citizens, suddenly they have this self respect and this image of moral superiority.
Exactly. And one of the things that I learned from Lawson, he emphasized this, that the discipline of nonviolence, this Gandhian playbook, he had been to India himself, had made a deep dive in his own life about this discipline, comes with practice and we're actually with rehearsal. It's not something like you just stick a daisy in a gun barrel and you're not violent. Yahoo! No, 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 no. You actually have to rehearse it and practice it, not unlike, as Lawson would say, an elite military unit rehearses and practices its maneuvers. I'm curious because I wasn't sure, but to what extent did Lawson train King or inform his understanding of nonviolence?
I think Lawson was an important teacher for King, along with people like Bayard Rustin
Mhm.
and other nonviolent activists. It's really important to remember that King had studied some nonviolent philosophy in college, but it wasn't central to his identity. And when the Montgomery bus boycott began, one of the first things he did was to go out and get a gun.
Right.
And when Bayard Rustin showed up at his house and said, "I hear you've been talking about nonviolent protest. Why you have a gun under the sofa cushion?" King had to think about it. Like,
Mhm.
what does nonviolent protest mean to him? Is it just a, sort of a PR strategy, or is he really going to commit to it? And that's where people like Lawson came in and really had these long late night discussions with him about the power of nonviolence and the discipline required. And King evolved. It didn't happen overnight. You can see him putting together all these pieces over time. And then it really affects him profoundly. Obviously, by the time he travels to India in the late 50s, and by the time he starts, and then when he wins the Nobel Peace Prize and begins to think about a more global role that he can take, that's when the nonviolence really becomes a central part of his mission and his cause. And it's not just a tactic anymore; it's a philosophy.
And it seemed to it merged quite well with his, understanding of Jesus and the Sermon of the Mount, and it just made sense, I think, in his worldview as I understood it from your book.
100%. I think, everything in King's life is rooted in Jesus. And it's funny because I did an event at the National Cathedral, and Bishop Buddy said, "I've heard you say in interviews like 10 times, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Like everything comes back to Jesus for King." And I have to tell you that when I hear that coming from, a white Jewish journalist, I love it because you're objective in this matter.
Well, I always say I have a lot in common with Jesus. We're both nice Jewish boys. He's a prophet. I'm a comedian. He
Right.
walked on water. I surf, and both of our mothers think we're the son of God. So I'm totally down with Jesus. The only problem with Christianity is very few have actually tried it. So that's my rant. I don't want to lay material on you. Yeah, I was completely moved and entranced by the book. And I think as the current moment that we're in now, this whatever you want to call this Trumpian little moment, that King is he's like more of a statue. He's not so much a human being. And so what you've, I believe, have done has sort of reintroduced him, put flesh back on the statue that, like all of us, it drifts into the, backwaters of time.
Well, if I have done that, or if I've helped do that to some small extent, that's a great blessing and a great gift, and I'm privileged to help reintroduce folks to this great man. But that's what I mean, that's the power of books, right? Like whether
Mm.
you're reading a novel or a biography, it asks you to think about someone else's perspective, and that's something we don't do enough these days.
Right. Well, also, I think in any kind of creative endeavor, even though it's fact based, it's a biography, you have to reimagine it. It has to get processed through Jonathan Eig's sensibility in life and indeed imagination. And I'm curious, two questions. How has it enriched you? And then two, what really surprised you most about King as you began this odyssey into his life?
Well, I can't begin to tell you how much it enriched me just to get to spend time with Reverend Lawson, for example. I was calling him every week for a while during COVID, and getting to have these long conversations with people who were friends of Martin Luther King, who I can say became friends of mine. Um,
You know,
and just to think more about what it means to believe in something bigger than yourself, whether you want to call it God or Allah, or whether you just want to call it whatever makes you feel right. That notion really shook me up, really made me think about what matters, why we're here, and spending time with these people, and thinking about King's devotion to this sense of this concept of love, um, was absolutely profound for me. um,
well, when I was in the presence of Lawson, I always felt I was in the presence of like a great man. I really
yeah,
felt that. Haven't felt that a lot in my life. I felt like if you're going to talk about Mount Rushmore of great 21st and 20th century icons of social justice, Lawson deserves a place on the mountain, but he's relatively unknown, I think,
yeah,
to the general public. Of course, it was also Lawson who invited King to Memphis in 1968, where he sadly met his, he was assassinated. And I'll say this, and you didn't really get into it because your book ends literally with the gunshot. It's like, boom. the shot is off and the story's over. But I can remember very clearly Lawson talking about that assassination. I think he even officiated at James Earl Ray's wedding in
Yeah.
prison.
Yeah.
And he was very much convinced, and this doubles back to something I also like to talk about, that, the FBI or maybe the CIA was involved in his assassination. You didn't get into it in the book, but I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, he was absolutely adamant about it. So were King children. A lot of people close to the Kings to this day still feel like there was some kind of a conspiracy, and the family actually sued and won a civil suit, claiming that there was a conspiracy and that James O'Reilly was not the shooter. But I decided not to get into it because there's no way to answer it definitively, and I wanted the readers to come away from this book believing that racism killed King, and that's all that matters. It doesn't really matter who pulled the trigger. Our society couldn't handle him. Our society, our government wanted him gone,
Mhm.
and they created the conditions in which someone would want to assassinate him. And to me, that's the most important thing.
And one of the things I think that's lost over time is that King, in his own time, was a radical. And as was Ali, in their own times. They
Yeah.
suffered for their beliefs, one, because he was assassinated and ostracized. And I think if you want to get national holidays and streets and schools named after you, the radical stuff's got to we got to get that out. I think that's,
Yeah. Harry Belafonte talked about that a lot. He said, we only celebrate dead radicals in this country. And we do it by watering down their messages and choosing the parts that make us most comfortable. What do we remember about Muhammad Ali? We remember him lighting the Olympic torch. We
yeah.
remember him when he's harmless.
Hmm.
We don't choose to remember the dangerous parts. And we forget too that King by 1966 was wildly unpopular in this country. Two-thirds of all Americans in the Gallup survey disapproved of Martin Luther King, because he was demanding change in the North too. He was saying that segregation in Chicago and New York was as bad as Alabama, and he was starting to speak out in the Vietnam War. And people's attitude was, "Hey, stay in your lane. Stick to voting rights. We gave you this beautiful bill. Um, stop pushing." And King insisted on continuing to push. So I felt like it was really important to remind people of how radical and how dangerous both of these men were, and how they suffered for it.
Yeah, and I think King was very aware. I think it's even in his last speech in Memphis, he feels, this powerful fatalism that his time is, coming to an end. Maybe he knew things that we didn't know at that time.
Well, he said it like so clearly. He said, "I'd like to live a long life. Longevity is a blessing, but that doesn't matter for me anymore. I just want to do God's will."
One of the things that's incredibly interesting to me is this relationship between Hoover and Lyndon, LBJ. Of course, that goes back a long time, precedes even his vice presidency. I think they were neighbors in Washington, D.C. And as a caveat, I will say that I also wrote a script called Ballot Box 13 about how Lyndon gets to the Senate in 48. But this kind of complicated figure of our American president, Lyndon Johnson, who's thrust into the presidency via an assassin's bullet, and he's a complicated character, and he's got this very close relationship that goes back a long time with Hoover. And I was just, it's just complicated to me. I can't quite unravel it because Lyndon, for many, is the greatest civil rights president, of the last centuries. Yet he was right there with, J.Edgar tapping King's phones.
Yeah, people are complicated. And, Bobby Kennedy, another great liberal hero, progressive hero, is the one who authorized those wiretaps in the first place. JFK knew about it, and LBJ. You asked me earlier what surprised me most.
Yeah.
I was surprised how involved LBJ was in the wiretapping and how much he knew about it, and how he seemed to really be enjoying the process of listening in on King's phone calls, and even personally, encouraging the dissemination of those wiretaps to the media. LBJ was deep in it, And at the same time, he's calling King and asking him for help in passing this legislation, and asking him for help in putting out the fires in Los Angeles and Watts. Um, so hey, maybe that's just how all politicians think. Like it's all about end results and the but the funny thing is that King couldn't understand it. He couldn't understand that there's this political gamesmanship. It just wasn't the way he was wired. If he had said to LBJ, "Yeah, you want my help in Watts? I'm here. Get J. Edgar Hoover off my damn back, and we got a deal." LBJ would have respected that actually, but King just wasn't wired to think and act that way.
Yeah, you said somewhere, maybe in an interview or in the book, that he's this great radical, but he's also kind of conflict averse.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? I mean, he hated arguments, and I think it stemmed from his father. He was just absolutely scared to death to stand up to his old man, and you see it even with other black leaders. He's afraid to argue with the NAACP leaders or with the Urban League leaders. He's just he prefers to keep everybody happy, and as a result of that, he gets pushed around sometimes.
Well, that's an interesting. Yeah, we all have that. I think we all want to be liked. We all want approval. You want, to be you want this great. You've gotten this incredible approval for your book, and it must feel wonderful. And I think both King and Ali really had a deep-seated need to feel the love, to feel that appreciation, and I think that's part of their, desire to have the affection of, let's face it, many women.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. It's funny because when I met with Dick Gregory, I was working on the Ali book at the time. He said to me, "You need to try to figure out if you're going to write this book, especially white boy." He called me. If a white boy
Yeah,
write this book, you need to understand what made a black kid same age as Emmett Till think that he could talk back and not get whooped for it. What made him think that he was special? And that's a great question for any biographer. What made this character think that they were special? What made them think that they could change the world? Because most of us feel like, no, that's too big a problem. That's somebody else's problem. What made them willing to risk their lives because they thought that they were special enough to change the world? And I think you're right. In some cases, it's they loved attention. They believed that they were worthy of that attention. Ali was dyslexic, and I think that he couldn't get attention in the classroom, even though he was obviously brilliant. Teachers thought he was dumb, so he
mhm.
found a way to get attention elsewhere by being a class clown and by being a great athlete. King was really short. He was the preacher's kid. He was trying to find a way to stand out, but he had incredible charm and charisma, and he would tell girls on dates when he was just like 17, 18 years old, "I'm going to kill Jim Crow." Not "I'm going to help kill Jim Crow," or not "I'm going to join the movement for civil rights." "I am going to kill Jim Crow." Like, where does that confidence come from? But he had it baked in from a very early age.
I think that's one of the larger mysteries of his life. It's
Yeah,
almost the sled in Citizen Kane. There's the rosebud somewhere in there.
right.
Ali definitely, you know, had that sort of sense of specialness, and to me, they were both iconic. I mean, last night, by the way, I was watching again. I'd seen it before, the Dick Cavett documentary with Muhammad Ali.
Hmm.
And one thing that's on display in that is how brilliant he was, how facile, how intelligent, how funny, and how insightful he was, in his moment.
Yeah,
It was incredible. And also how much he really loved Dick Cavett. You really felt that in the movie. And I thought it was great, because I know I'm talking to this guy tomorrow. Ali's going to be fresh in my mind. Uh,
yeah. I love the fact that Ali will s- will s- will get it going with anybody. He's happy to debate anybody, anytime, anywhere. He didn't prepare for these things. He just trusted his instincts and his intellect, and he was a brilliant speaker.
Here's my Ali story. I was a kid in high school, and the sporting life is very important for me. I play baseball and all this stuff, and I'm a surfer. But somehow my dad got us tickets, my brother and I, to see Ali Norton in Los
Oh
Angeles.
wow!
Now, I was 16, so I just had a driver's license. I really didn't even know my way around LA. The Forum from the Valley it was like going, to Shangri-La or something. And somehow my brother and I, we made it. I'm like, show me the map. This is before navigation. How do I get here? And not only that, we're in a different. I grew up in WPL, White People Land, and the Valley, and we're in Inglewood, and we're just like coming right there, and I finally park, we get there, and they go, oh no, you're not on the list, we'll call. And my brother, who loved and idolized my younger brother Ali, breaks out into tears, just just hysterical, like this is a chance of his life. And somehow, I don't know how I did it, but I talked my way. No, we're the radio station, my family's in the radio. And we got in, ding, right at the bell at the
Wow.
beginning of the fight. And that's this is the one after he gets his jaw broken, he comes back and gets a win
Mhm.
against Norton. His skills are already, on the decline. So that would have been like 73. So he hasn't fought Frazier yet. I mean
Oh,
Foreman, who sadly just passed away. Anyway, that's my Ali story. I saw
that's
him.
great. I can't believe you were there for that fight.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I recall, he was just kind of scuffling, he's just like. And then in the end, he was able to get a flurry and get the
Yeah, he won
decision.
the fight, but it was close. And some of the reporters thought that he might have lost it.
Right. And Norton at that time was like an incredibly strong, vital specimen. One of the things, both of us, I see you've got a boxing glove there. It looks like it's signed. Maybe it's an Ali glove.
Yeah,
I
it
don't
is.
know.
Yeah, it's Ali.
But I do boxing training. I really love it. And, to do 2 rounds or 3 or 4 rounds with the mitts, or the athleticism that it takes to be in that ring, the courage is amazing to me. I don't think people really get it if you haven't even just dabbled in it like I have.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's another one of the, we talked about the confidence that these guys have. Um, you know, to get in the ring with somebody who's, bigger and stronger and younger than you, and just to have the confidence that like nobody can beat me. Ali never lost that. He never lost that confidence that you have to have to be a professional fighter and to succeed.
And you chronicled quite in detail his almost every punch that he took, on the long path downward into, I guess, Parkinson's or something like Parkinson. And there's almost something fatalistic about it, like he wanted to punish himself. I didn't quite understand that. He fought so many fights. I guess he just needed the attention. I'm not
He needed
sure.
the attention. He needed the money. He just always had this feeling that everything was going to work out for him. Like he wasn't going to get hurt. He
Mhm.
wasn't going to um, lose no matter what. He just always had this confidence about him. It's funny. I hate to even say this, but I see some characteristics in Donald Trump that I see in Muhammad Ali. This sense of narcissism, this sense that like whatever I say is going to turn out right because I said it, and for a long time it works. The big difference, of course, is that Ali loved people, loved to
Mhm.
laugh, and cared about making people happy, and cared about the underdog, and stood up for some principles. There's some differences between the two
Yeah,
for
big one.
sure.
And he had a soul as opposed to the current occupant.
Yes.
Yes. But I think both of them, all these people, a lot of this comes down to almost fathers and sons. It's almost Shakespearean, when you
Mhm.
look at these characters, even Bush, I don't want to get too far, but his young Bush and older Bush, there's something there. It's like, the history plays in Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I feel that. One of the things I wanted to touch on with you, because it's where the two books really intersect, is you got Ali and Malcolm X, and they're sort of like separatists with a certain kind of empowered separation, let's put it that way. I think that was sort of the ideal. And then you've got this big goal of King from really beginning in the 50s, which is integration.
Right.
And there's I don't know if there's a clash in strategy and in worldview. I just want you to maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, this is one of the really fascinating things about King and Ali is that they differed dramatically in their philosophical views on what to do about racism. As you said, King was all about integration, and Ali and Malcolm X were separatists. They thought white people could never be trusted. There was no point in trying to improve um, the balance between black and white. Like the only way to go was to just to get the hell out. And you could argue that maybe they were right. I don't know. That's depending on how optimistic, how pessimistic you are. But what I love though is that Malcolm and Ali and King were still all interested in dialogue. Yeah, they criticized each other.
Hmm.
Malcolm was brutal in criticizing King. Ali was pretty rough on him too. But when push came to shove, they were all fighting for black dignity, and they recognized that there was this core foundation of what they all believed in. And that's why when Ali and King came together, they loved each other. Like they may disagree, but they loved each other, and they were both just warm, funny, loving people. My favorite moment, King and Ali only met twice. One of them is captured on film. There was a news conference in Louisville where King had come for a housing protest, segregated housing, and Ali just showed up there, and they met and chatted for a while, and then they went out and talked to reporters. And there's TV cameras there, and they ask King and Ali as they're standing next to each other, what happened in the room. And King's very serious. He's always very serious in front of the cameras. Well, we had a very productive meeting. We spoke quite cordially. And Ali interrupts him. Like nobody interrupts Martin Luther King, but except Muhammad Ali says, "Oh, we're like Khrushchev and Kennedy. We're the best of friends." And King just loses it. He starts cracking up, and it's beautiful because you can just see that they're having a good time, and they really liked each other.
Well, integration becomes somewhat of a quaint goal for the civil rights movement as we move deeper into the decade. I mean, I'm not to diminish that, what happened at the lunch counters, housing, uh, transportation, all these efforts to break down those walls. But then the big battle becomes voting rights
Right.
and the shift. And I think at that point, some of the boycott nonviolent strategies aren't quite as effective when it comes to voting rights. And that's where I think maybe this empowerment, black power, just empowerment things become, a sharper focus in, the movement at that time.
Yeah, I think when Jesse Jackson talks about this a lot. He says it wasn't really integration that we were pushing for; it was desegregation. Like break down the walls, break down the laws, just let it, and then let us do our thing. And that's just a different spin on it, but it's important because it's about agency. We're saying you don't have to give us anything; just let us be. Let us have a fair shot at being equal Americans. And that's where the Black Power movement picked things up and said, we're not going to keep taking these little handouts. We're not going to take these token gestures. We demand more.
I remember asking Reverend Lawson once at one of the workshops. I said, after you guys integrated the lunch counters, which is when commerce really lived downtown, people went downtown to
Right.
shop and eat. And really shortly after that, we see this suburban explosion of malls and freeways. And I asked him, I said, how much do you think that was just a white reaction or a white blowback to some of the efforts that you guys initiated, at the beginning of the decade with at the lunch counters?
And
He
what did he
agreed.
say?
He said yes.
I agree. I think when you see King and others coming to Chicago and saying, these neighborhoods have to change, the reaction for a lot of white people is, okay, I'm out. I'm try to find me in the suburbs, because they just move further away, and hoping that like they could stay a step ahead of the integration of the neighborhoods.
I think that dovetails back to the current moment we're in with I don't like to use his name. I call him 47 with 34, 47 president, 34 felonies, felon in chief. When he talks about make America great again, what's he really referring to? I think to me it's the 1950s, this sort of where the white people sort of enjoyed all the benefits of the economic expansion that was America enjoyed, after World War II. But the other folks forget about it. That's the perfect world that I think lives in sort of his nostalgic memory. And I think that's the world that Lawson, King, and Ali in his own way were trying to break through.
Yeah, and they did break through. And I think that I like to tell myself that this is the last generation of people who will respond to that dog whistle of "Make America White Again."
Hmm.
I really believe that like we've moved on, we've become a more enlightened and diverse society, and somehow this message of "Make America Great Again" has captured enough votes for the moment. But I like to think that it's a dying cancer.
I think it is. I mean, I just live in a different world. I Somebody texted me from high school to this morning. He had posted something in reaction to something that I did from the last podcast defending Trump, and then it was sort of a mishmash and gobbledygook, and I deleted it. And then he texts me back saying, "Why did you delete me?" And I said, "Well, you're still my friend. We still went to high school together. It just didn't add up and make sense to me. But you're still free to share your thoughts, even if I disagree. So
Mhm.
I'm still your friend. Don't worry about it."
Yeah.
I still deleted him, but whatever. That I feel like I live in my own world. I don't see those people, but occasionally they get through my sieve. I don't know what kind of reaction have you had, maybe with your books about from the other side of this political divide.
Well, it's hard to tell. Obviously, the people coming to my book events are mostly people who are inclined to read books about Black history, and I don't know that the people who are right now trying to ban Black history and exclude Black history books from our libraries. I don't know if they're picking up this book and reading it or coming to my events. It's hard to say, but nevertheless, I think it's just important that we put these stories out and hope that people come to them. And I think that, um, King's message, if we read it, still really speaks to us. If we listen to his words again, they can move us. But right now, we're living at a time where people don't want to listen to anything that makes them uncomfortable. So that's a challenge. I don't know. Part of King's great power was that he was able to get people to listen to things that made them uncomfortable, and and that was a big part of his job. Bernard Lafayette, who you mentioned earlier, told me that he always thought of King as the strongest crowbar America ever produced, and he would just pry at you
Mhm.
until you began to say, okay, yeah, all right, maybe I can move a little bit.
I met him, I guess, about a year and a half ago. He came and spoke. And just a side note about Bernard Lafayette, as I recall, is he went to Selma before anybody. Him and Bevel were in Selma
Right.
doing the voting rights work. Let's see, probably would there be 63? It was like, where we go? They should go here. Well, we nobody should go there. So they go. And when Medgar Evers is killed, which is the summer of 63. Now I'm kind of, my dates are in my head. The same night, there was an assassination attempt on Lafayette and Bevel. It was actually part of a larger plot. So he
Mhm.
says uh, in his book, Bevel, Lafayette, John Lewis, and Diane Nash are sort of this core four. And one of the moments that was really big in my own literary efforts as a screenwriter was when they asked King with Foreman from Core, "Hey, come with us to Mississippi on these buses. Let's do this freedom ride." And Lawson's there. He's on that first bus
Mhm.
too. I got a great picture of him. And King, for his own reasons, some of which are mysterious, refuses. It disappointed them in the moment. It was something. This is not my Golgotha, the hill. I, I don't know if you got into that in your book so much, but I thought it was a pivotal moment because he's he's got to make choices. It's a strategy. He's not there to sacrifice himself. He's got larger goals that he's looking at. Hopefully you can expand on that.
Yeah, he was struggling sometimes, and remember, after Montgomery, he failed over and over again, and the lunch counter protests and the bus, um, the freedom rides, they moved on without him really, and he would
Hmm.
support where he could, but he wasn't central to those things. And some of the younger activists, he was only King was only like 30, but some
Yeah.
of the younger activists thought that he was old hat and that he
Hmm.
was, the moment had passed him by. And that's to his, credit that he was figuring it out. He was figuring out, what he could do and where he could be most effective. And he didn't always get it right. He was criticized a lot for not getting on those buses. Um, and maybe he was scared. Maybe he certainly had to worry about going to jail again.
Right.
Uh, and he was also trying to figure out where he could be most effective. And I think he was trying to figure out his role in the movement.
One of the things that hit me really about your book that I hadn't really felt before in my own is how much stress he was under, the depression,
Yeah,
the anxiety, like you just said, the doubt. It wasn't like he was just, like Charlton Heston or carrying a cross. He was tortured. I almost, and one of the things I got from your book, I mean, his assassination was a nightmare for America, but on some level, I felt like, oh my God, he's released from this pressure cooker that he was in psychologically.
yeah, he was. All his life he struggled with mental health issues. He attempted suicide twice as a teenager.
Mhm.
He was clearly under enormous strain and depressed at times. He was hospitalized, I don't know, at least 8 or 10 times, I think, for what he told reporters was exhaustion. But we can now see that it was clearly some kind of a mental health issue, depression or anxiety. And it only got worse as the FBI began torturing him and trying to destroy him, trying to break up his marriage. Every day having to wake up wondering if that's the day that the newspaper is going to run a picture of you coming out of a hotel room with a woman. He had to deal with that, and yet he kept going. Like, I don't know how he did it. And we can listen to his phone calls. We can read the transcripts of his phone
Wow.
calls now, and you can see how frustrated he is. And he feels like no one's listening to him anymore. He feels lost at times. Some of his friends thought he was suicidal, or certainly at least um, fatalistic about his future.
Well, you had access in ways that other biographers did not to those FBI tapes, and in a way, it's we live in this Me Too world, and he's getting a little bit Me Too, but it also gives, I think, a clear picture of how he was under assault by the powers of our own government. So it wasn't just his behavior; it was like, who the fuck is tapping every frigging conversation you're doing? I mean, what an assault!
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, they not only tapped his phones, they made tapes and send those tapes out to the media. They sent a tape to his home with a letter saying that you're going to be exposed unless you commit suicide. Um, I would have quit. I would have run for the hills. He doubled down. He only got more courageous over time.
right. Well, you did a tremendous job in bringing someone out of the statues and back to life. And one of the things I appreciate about the Ali book and the King book is this relationship between society and sport.
Mhm.
And in the King book, society is really in the foreground, but the sports back there too. There's some Ali and some Jackie Robinson. You get into Jackie's life, uh, and then in Ali's, it's sport in the foreground with society in the background. And the fact they're inseparable. So what I sense in Jonathan Eig is a jock, somebody who loves sports, still wants to play, kick it
Yeah,
around, the whole
no
thing.
doubt. No doubt.
Am I right?
I love sports. It's like a huge part of my life and identity, and I'm still out there every day doing something.
Oh, good. Well, sports writing was quite an art. It's
Oh yeah, I learned to write by reading, you know, Red Smith and Frank DeFord and George Plimpton. Those were my heroes as a kid.
I'll tell you, one of my favorite movies was Paper Lion,
Oh yeah,
the
yeah, great
Plimpton
book too.
story.
Yeah,
Yeah, and Jim Murray, who you quote, actually. Do
yeah,
you quote him in Ali or King?
yeah. In the Ali book, I quote.
Yeah, he actually had animus towards Ali, but he
Oh
was
yeah,
he was a great writer. I mean, to get a Jim Murray column about you, I would have, you just black and behind me, or who's behind me? Koufax and Drysdale, right here.
yeah.
They're little
I
bobbleheads.
love it.
Sandy was a big guy for me growing up. I had one conversation with him. So, folks, check out the books. And we didn't even mention Lou Gehrig. There's another time, another moment. Uh, I'm a little nervous to read about that because it's such a sad decline, with his
Yes,
struggle with.
it is. It's the worst way to go. And but he was so brave, and the book will make you cry for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, how close is the book to the Gary Cooper version?
Not too close. Don't
Yeah.
believe the movie.
Yeah, but I mean, people forget like what a slugger he was and what a dynamic ball player, and of course, before all of our times. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
there's a
Well,
lot
thank
to.
you so much.
What's that?
Thank you. Appreciate
Oh yeah, I appreciate you folks. Check out the books. Martin Luther King, A Life, Muhammad Ali, A Life. They really work in tandem if you get a chance to read them consecutively, and it brings a decade and a time to life that really I think sheds a lot of light on our current moment. And last question, I know what an Oscar looks like. You know, it's the statue, the thing. Hey, you know, what does a Pulitzer Prize look like? I don't know what it looks like.
It's kind of small.
That's it.
That's it. It's also
Okay.
like it's a deadly weapon potentially. Like somebody's going to write a mystery story about somebody who dies with one of these things stuck in their chest. It's very
Okay.
sharp.
That's the Pulitzer Prize, ladies
That's
and
it.
gentlemen. Has it always been that, or is it morphed?
I have no idea.
I
I
have
think
no.
it's been this for a while.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Extremely well deserved. And I feel like I have a new friend. Stick with me on the other side to say goodbye. But to everybody else, thanks for hanging with me. Check out the books: Muhammad Ali, Martin Luther King, Lou Gehrig, Jackie Robinson, Al Capone. I mean, it's coming at me like crazy. Look, we're both domers. Till next time, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that, I mean namashaloha. See ya.